This is a crazy world of humans. Our ancestors would not recognise what it has become, but there are similarities. Our ancestors were controlled by an elite group made up of royalty and religion. Kings, queens, bishops and landowners told the masses what to do. Amazingly, very little has in fact changed. The difference is, we believe we are free. In truth, there is no freedom. In truth, you and I are controlled, manipulated, and cajoled into action or inaction. We are bled dry of our money, time, soul, and life. We are still forced to fight the good fight for our masters, and we really do think we have decided to do so. There is no choice, there is only control. Prepare to open your eyes to the world of social media, news sites, marketing and propaganda that makes you live the life you do. Yes, they are controlling our minds. This is an economic world. It is structured around money, and anything that gets in the way of the machine is more often than not moved or eradicated. There is no room for anything to oppose this. Each one of us is in the system, whether we like it or not, and we believe there is often precious little we can do about it. But how did all this begin? And who was the originator of the system? In the beginning, mankind was nomadic. For a period so long that it staggers the mind, we travelled along coastlines, around lakes, and traversed river systems. We simply could not travel across land because most of it was covered in trees and vegetation. We did so purely to hunt and collect foodstuffs, and then return to our boats. This is the way and form mankind evolved his mind over vast periods of time. We were in tune with our needs and nature's larder. We followed herds as they migrated. We knew which plants were safe to eat, and we only took what we needed because we simply could not carry an overabundance of produce. All the anthropological evidence reveals that mankind was more peaceful and even lived longer lives than his later descendants who would settle down. Eventually, it appears that populations grew and nomadic cultures began to partly settle down. These settlements were probably originally staging posts for extended stays during winter or other such times, and eventually the rot set in. Remaining in one location for extended periods brought with it all manner of problems. Firstly, it brought the need to cultivate the land and to store provisions, because the animal larder would carry on moving and natural vegetation would carry on and follow the seasons. Secondly, it brought disease because of human and animal waste and all kinds of other filth. And thirdly, it brought strife in ways that the nomadic smaller groups would not have foreseen. These settlements would be attracting more and more people into one single location, forcing people together for longer and longer periods of time in cramped and rapidly unnatural environments. Mankind was growing apart from nature and had to learn a whole new set of skills, from building to being more socially oriented. Structures of wood and structures of society brought with them hierarchy and alpha dominance in a different way to the previous nomadic lifestyle. Groups were now bigger, and so conflicts between those who would be in dominance would have been more frequent. But it was too late. The old ways were rapidly being forgotten. It is amazing how quickly the skills of the past generation can disappear. For example, today There are people who do not even know how to cook because their lifestyle has simply never called for the skill. We are constantly battling the balance between the income stream and the spending stream, and we find very little room for such trivial matters as cooking, let alone time for our children. But cooking is only one of the many skills that we are losing due to mass production of ready-made meals and lifestyle habits. Eventually though, our newfound settlements had to find ways to deal with their new social problems, and the mind of man has a unique tool for the purpose: imagination. Man developed from within his own imagination new social structures of tribal leadership, and those who had maintained or learned new skills important for the group would become dominant. This is no different today, because those who can control likes and followers on social media are all powerful, rich, and more often than not, paid for by corporate or governmental entities. In past times, these were not always the strongest and best fighters or hunters, but more often than not, those who knew how to heal and gel the community, people who influenced others, recognise the similarities. We call these people of the past medicine men, shaman, and latterly priests. As the Old Testament so eruditely informs us, it was the priesthood who would guide the people and even crown kings. The royal family of England is still to this day crowned by the Church as a direct result of this same ancient power structure, uniting religion and state over the people. And today these groups utilise all the modern methods to maintain their power. Millions are spent on public relations experts, news coverage, and social media to keep our elite in power. With this new advent of power came many new ways of manipulating the growing masses, who were herded into the new imaginative religious structures and given rules in the form of dogma, doctrine, and tradition. Now power was from the gods, and nobody could argue with such imagined power. The knowledge of navigation, of the stars, of the seasons, and of course, of the reality of the mind of man became powerful tools in the armoury of the Church. To know the seasons enabled the priest to appear magical and in touch with God. To know how to read the stars for navigation enabled the tribe to trade and invade. To know the mind of man allowed the priesthood to manipulate and control. All of this was truly a powerful knowledge. This knowledge was passed down within the brotherhoods in symbolism, latterly in texts, and certainly in tradition. And today that knowledge has become so powerful, it is used to control billions of people without them even suspecting it. Tradition is a powerful tool used by these power brokers. It brings security in the mind. It is not simply something we imagine our grandparents had. It is not just something these stuffy-looking pompous Englishmen reenact every day in Parliament, or that wonderfully colourful changing of the guard outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. Our English term, tradition, comes from traditio, a Latin word meaning the delivery of doctrine and surrender. But more pertinent to us, it means something handed down. There is depth here, as many will know, for this something handed down is not just the old pocket watch our ancestors sported in the 19th century and has been passed down from one generation to another. No, tradition is also the continuance of something much more profound, much more in tune with the long-standing control within an elite group. In the very first usage of the word, we find that it was in fact used for the passing on of doctrine and religious dogma. a sacred act itself, and something which became symbolic. The word sacred itself comes from Old Latin secares, meaning to bind, restrict, enclose, and protect. And this is where much of the truth lies, in symbolism and sacredness, for both are binding and surrendering to something being passed down. The acts of those parliamentarians and the guard at Buckingham Palace are symbolic and sacred acts, representing something other than the physical and literal things we see. The same is true of religious tradition. There is no truth that the taking of the bread and wine at the Eucharist ritual, a tradition seen across the world, actually is the body and blood of Jesus Christ. No, the act is symbolic and solemnly reminds the religious initiate of the fact that he is part of a greater Christian brotherhood, that he is accepting Christ, and that his body was broken and blood spilt for us, and that he is a continuation of a long line. Whatever one's opinion on that religious act, the fact remains that it is a very powerful tool for reminding the masses of their place in the world, and via an act that is emotionally strong. This is a manipulating tradition, kept alive to keep the sheep in the fold. Today, new forms of tradition and sacred acts are used. Take a seat in any coffee house and look around. You will see dozens of people staring into their phones, checking their social media accounts, keeping up with their peers. It is a new tradition, forming before your eyes. People looking intently at new stained glass windows of control and manipulation. As we can now see, tradition can be a very strong device when allied to emotion, and psychologists have discovered that allegorical tales are very often absorbed better than any literal telling. The same is true of social media and fake news. Because it is written, it must be true. Because there is a meme, it must have some truth, surely. In this allegorical or symbolic respect, there are other words that also relate, and of which we should take note. These words are now often hold mystery to us because we have lost the meaning of them, as we have all too often lost the meaning of tradition. Myth, fable, story, tale, all these and more are used in the traditional way to pass on hidden or esoteric knowledge from one generation to another, and this is a tradition going back in time for thousands of years, the custom of the storyteller, whose job it was to keep alive the truths of the tribe. From the medicine man and shaman to druid, Brahmin and later Catholic priest, we have entrusted our social history and religious emotional beliefs to the wise man of the tribe. Today we have these tales being given to us in films, TV shows and even games. All of these are paid for and formed by people who have vast sums of money. They utilise these methods to continue their power over us. They tell us tales that back up the fact that they are right and everybody else is wrong. We are fed tales of the evil East and the nasty religions who mean to do us harm. And we soak up these stories into our soul, and we learn to yield our freedom to the machine. These incredible and intuitive traditions then emerged from early man and his understanding of the world around him and how he survived. But all was not well in mankind's early settled Edens, and differences of opinion would often arise between settled groups or tribes, and not least of these differences was jealousy. This distinctly negative element of the human mind would involve jealousy over land, produce, mates, and of course the still relevant modern problem of jealousy over holy sites. However, trade also played a big part in the greater mix, and so tribes grew steadily more and more wealthy in terms of possessions, as each area had its own special supply of salt, gold, animals, plants, and even access routes to the more distant lands. This was the birth of our modern system many thousands of years ago, built upon an unnatural desire to remain in one location, and it also built upon the natural desire to be the best, one of the strongest evolutionary drives. These same drives within us feed the selfie culture, taking photographs of ourselves to prove to our peers that we are the fittest of the species. We have the best clothes, go to the best places, have the best mate. We are wealthy, happy, and let's be honest, completely faking it. Settlements of old eventually became trading posts for vast quantities of goods, and demarcation of roles emerged with blacksmiths, farmers, potters, and all manner of other roles. Trading went on like this for millennia, with the priesthood often controlling the process and growing in power themselves as their communities prospered. They would take a percentage of the produce and offer it to the gods in order to maintain the weather and good fortune of the tribe. Of course, there were no gods, and so the real offerings simply went into the coffers of the ruling elite. The greatest of gods, the sun, would be worshipped and aided in its journey to reappear the following day. It was the giver of life and the destroyer. It mirrored the duality in the mind of man himself, and so we are formed in his likeness. We were solar beings, formed and given life by the power of the golden orb, and nothing became more important than ensuring its daily and yearly cycles. The priests of this great power were the alpha males, the medicine men or shaman of earlier times. It was they who gave authority to the king or pharaoh, who himself must be the son of the sun on earth. He was the marketing tool of the priesthood, and history is awash with the violent downfalls of the solar king when he stepped out of line and upset the priesthood. Markets emerged near or even in temples, and bustled with people and produce of the wider world. Social commerce also emerged as priesthoods shared or traded knowledge with other cultures, and soon belief systems across vast continents had little to set them apart. Much of this knowledge or tradition was very important and of value to the community, and involved knowledge of astrology and astronomy to enable them to predict the seasons and for navigation. As the power base of trade grew, so the ability to navigate became extremely important, and as the majority of the population had forgotten how to do this, it emerged as a special knowledge, guarded closely by the elite. Control of the trading markets, both of the land upon which it was carried out and the navigation required to operate it, grew so powerful over time that the priesthood would do almost anything to maintain control. This is why much religious literature is awash with rules and regulations for trade and commerce. The system of trading eventually needed organising differently because of lies. It all began because of a deceit, and it remains pretty much the same today. At the market, a thing called a promise emerged, whereby a man trading a goat for a pig would promise to bring his goat the following day, only to fail in his promise. The priesthood or leader who controlled the process realised that some new system was needed to come into play, and so created money, from the word moner, meaning to warn. This new money was very cleverly based upon the gods themselves, adding incredible weight and fear to the promise. Gold was manifestly the solar divinity, the sun, and silver the lunar deity, a mirror of the sun. Handing over a symbolic representation of the gods was a powerful promise, and the gods would know if you reneged on your promise. The church itself backed the promise, and so became the bank, Power was well and truly in the hands of the few, and the rest of us simply had no choice but to conform. This situation is almost unchanged, and today many banks are at least still partly owned by various churches, not least of which is the Catholic Church. Our lives are still, and more so than ever, run by money, and we have no choice but to live in a world of commerce. Every day we hand over our images of the solar deities, which are no longer even real gold, but instead are promises of gold. There are more promises of gold in the world than there is gold, and so the system, created because of lies and deceit, is itself a total lie. But it is the system we live in, and individually we must make our own decisions on how to do so. But there is more deception than we know, and it is to these we must now turn. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, we are subjects of a massive machine. We are plugged in like a light that is only alive and lit by the machine, and because of this we no longer know how to shine for ourselves. But many do not realise that the machine in fact feeds from us, using our energy to capture and grow the machine that in turn captures more and more people hourly. We are all, in one way or another, slaves to the machine. We have seen how money enslaved us because of the lie and deceit of man, and how power was built and maintained by the few over the many. Today, it is the driving force of society. Every single one of us must sell something to get money, whether we sell our skills, services, products, or even our very soul. We all must constantly sell to earn. And because everybody is selling to everybody else, we must also buy. In our overpopulated world, full of people who no longer know the skills of basic survival, we must buy the basic products such as food and even water. But man has used his unique imagination to make better and more imaginative food and water, or so we believe. In fact, we dress up the ordinary and use our own inbuilt psychology to convince others that this added value is worth the extra money. We place a clever label on a bottle, add mystique, and then charge a ridiculous amount of money for what is basically a free product of the earth that we can no longer have access to as individuals because of the society we have created. We do the same for all manner of goods. In addition to this, we also create product or services that we do not need, and again add value or perception that we want to buy into. In order to understand how we are led down this path, we must see into the mind of the marketing man. Many marketing men will tell you that they need to understand the product or service in depth. This is true only in the sense that the marketing man needs to know to whom the product has to be sold. He defines the primary market sector and then secondary sectors, and very often will have multiple level campaigns. Let's take an example. Let's assume we need to sell a product to children. There are a great many ways to the market, but our purpose here is to see how we, as humans, are manipulated into action, or sometimes inaction. To sell to children, sometimes we may need to go through the desires and perceptions of the parents. However, let's assume we are targeting the children themselves. Firstly, we have to assume a product, and for this simple illustration, let's assume a new candy bar. In the first place, we have to make sure the packaging is right. Our inner desire to eat candy is in fact perfectly natural and is based upon the need for fruit, which of course feeds the body's need for vitamins and glucose. Unfortunately, the candy bar overfeeds us sugar and not glucose or vitamins, and so defeats the object, and in fact simply leaves us craving more because our body, firstly, is not getting what it needs, and secondly, there are often chemicals within the bar that are short and long-term addictive. So this knowledge of the marketing man simply dresses up the candy bar to look like fruit or whatever natural product or part of our diet it is replacing. In addition to this, there is the hormone process, which must be taken into account. The different ages of man produce different levels of hormones. When we are younger, our natural drives and desires are stronger and more acute. This means that when we are younger, we are more primary, and so primary colours, shapes, sounds and smells are used. This is of course a generalisation, and not every individual is the same, and this is indicative of how we are all placed into boxes throughout our lives, creating more unnatural states of existence and distancing us yet further from our own intuition. The marketing man's statistical data does in fact reveal that these uses of primary devices on children and young adults consistently delivers good results. The reverse of this is often true of the elderly generation, who prefer more pastel colours and softer shapes and sounds. We can see then in this simple demonstration how we can again fall into the traps of lies and deceit by our own hormones, desires and drives, and the manipulation of the machine. This manipulation has been in existence for thousands of years, and mankind, from the priesthood to the state, has learned how to use this to control us. The common folk of Europe, who were kept humble and illiterate for generations, were fed mass propaganda in stained glass windows and with the pageantry of state occasions. All of this and more fed the story chosen by the elite few to the masses, and the masses absolved themselves of responsibility by following. The next element our marketing man must include is a thing known as a branding device. This is not necessarily a corporate identity, as corporations have many products, and each one must have its own branding identity. If we take our fictional candy bar, it may very well carry the corporate logo, which is a symbol of the corporation. This can add value to the product if the corporation has a strong identity and can pull upon the emotions of the individual purchasing the product with the tribal sense of loyalty, brand or corporate loyalty. This is the exact same as loyalty to the church or state, and again absolves the individual of responsibility for what he is eating, or indeed feeding to his children. This absolution is false, as we all hold responsibility for our own actions. Just because a corporation is big and has been around for a long time does not mean that it is perfect. Far from it. The corporation is still run by humans out for greed and growth. We tend to forget that several big brand companies in fact started by selling us drugs or making weapons, and many still do. The emotions and ties of the corporation must firstly therefore be ones of trust in the corporation and its products. Any corporation that loses this trust factor is on a slippery slope and will have to go through a period of self-recreation in the marketplace to re-establish itself or even rebrand itself. One thing corporations, states and religions fear the most is the powerful word of mouth, which spreads bad news on the devil's radio of gossip like wildfire. This is the power of the individual against the control of the few, and is one reason that corporations attempt to appear under a disguise and therefore independent on the internet. A great many of the rebellious social media sites are in fact controlled by corporations and even government. In this way, they can control the minds of rebellious-minded people and guide them in specific directions. They can also monitor and collate information of people who might cause trouble. Once we have a strong corporate identity, we must then brand the candy bar dependent upon the selected marketplace. Some candy bars are in fact retro-branded to attract both children and the sense of history and tradition embedded in the older generations, allowing the person to recapture their youth, a time always emotionally tied and often imaginary. The branding of a product will go through a series of market tests with a specifically selected group and the results collated. This may happen several times, but in each case the marketing man will be looking for emotional results. This all pulls upon our deepest desires, and nothing is stronger than the utilisation of emotions. Religion, politics, and corporate greed has used emotional responses for an awful long time. In the end, marketing is about the psychology of man, and whoever best understands the mind of man will succeed in the financial stakes. Once the product has been branded and packaged according to all these criteria and more, the next step in the game is to convince the general public and the specific market sector to purchase the product. And in order to do this, we have developed a very simple structure that utilises our own psychology. Whether the launch of a product or a service is to be via advertising, press release or some other means, the actual method is the same and again is based upon perfectly natural desires. The process is called AIDA. The A stands for attention, and this is simply the method of attracting our attention in any way possible. In a press release, we have only a few seconds of the editor's time to attract his or her attention. This is an art, and the press release author must have their finger on the pulse of human activity. For instance, let's assume that we branded our new candy bar the Da Vinci Code Choco. The best time to release this would have been at the height of the Da Vinci Code phenomenon. It would have firstly made an interesting tale for any news editor, but secondly, it would have pulled upon the tribal desires of humans to be part of the wave, in the same way exactly that a bird changes direction when the flock moves. This is an inbuilt evolutionary protection device, and it is now being bastardized by the marketing man. It is enticing us into a dream reality based upon nature and manipulated for the desire to be the alpha dominant species. We turn this knowledge against ourselves and end up as extensions of a statistic, dehumanized, sterile, and eventually unhappy because our desires are in reality not fulfilled. Follow a dream and you end up in a dream. Grabbing the attention of the individual, regardless of genre, is the first and most important part of marketing. Breaking down the psychology of the prospective clients and the age, sex and cultural background are important to understanding how best to attract attention. For instance, with children, we use vibrant colours, primary shapes, fresh and enticing smells, and modern, catchy music and sound bites. With the eldest generations, we use pastel shades of colours, smoother shapes and retro smells and sounds. The reason for this is simple: hormones. The hormones of the individual change as time passes from strong to weak, and these affect our likes and dislikes. From teens to middle ages, there is a stronger sexual drive, and this also comes from hormones. Attention is more than just a TV advert or a brochure. It is also about social media. And on these sites, marketers have anywhere between 2 to 5 seconds to grab attention, and so they have to use clever techniques. Older generations are more canny and less likely to give you time. Younger ones are a little more gullible and may give you a little longer, although in all cases education and cultural backgrounds come into play. One of the best ways of grabbing and keeping attention is to ask questions, because everybody likes to talk about themselves, and social media is all about interaction. A really great social media post gets liked and shared because people want to associate themselves with it. Pulling on these natural inbuilt neuroses has always been a standard controlling tool, like listening to confession. It is more than just our liking to reveal our own lives. It is also a confessional, and the confessed is handing over a large part of their lives and connecting at a deeper level to the salesperson. It is called being trapped. The I stands for interest. Once we have managed to catch the editor or consumer's eye with attention, we now have to keep their interest. This involves telling them a little something about the thing that caught their attention in an interesting way. This, more often than not, must include drama and theatrics. We have to write the copy in the correct, dramatically oriented fashion for the given marketplace. It is a little like our attention being caught by a sudden movement in the woods. We stop for a moment and look. If we don't see another movement, then we simply move on. But if we do see another movement and then another, then our eye remains and we want to know more. Again, it is all pulling upon the natural senses and instincts, and interest is simply more little attentions. The D is for desire. Once we have attracted attention and maintained interest in the prospective client, neophyte or purchaser, we have them hooked, and we keep them hooked by building their desire to buy our product or do what we want them to. This step means that we have to create such a desire to buy the product or service that we have them in a virtual stranglehold. They must overcome their own cravings and urges to deny this stage, and that is difficult and almost impossible for a great many people to do, especially those who have no idea that they have been sold to in the first place. All of this is again based upon the strongest of human emotions. More often than not, for teenagers and upwards, this will include some form of sexual connotation, it being the strongest driving force. It may also be tribal, creating the desire to have what the rich and famous have, or indeed to be better than others and thereby stamp our perceived alpha dominance as the fittest of the bastardized species. This association will give people that talking point amongst their peers, so that they can show off how incredibly clever, rich, famous, individual, or just plain sexy they are by sharing it on social media. This creates an unreal world of perceptions around themselves, and gradually they forget who they really are and become an image of the marketing man's mind, the perfect fool. The final A is for action. Now that we've hooked the prey in with a dream world, we simply have to give them a way of achieving the dream for themselves. This is action, the how to get into dreamland. Today, with myriad ways of buying or joining in, such as telephones, shops, the internet, mail and email, there is a whole host of methods to access dreamland, and any seller who does not utilise all of these is missing out. We like to think we are stating our individuality by ordering online, where other fools drive to the shops, and yet it is just another method of accessing retail heaven. The real individual knows himself well enough to know better. In the end, the whole process reveals how easy it can be with this special knowledge to take from another. Create a dream and then sell it, and nobody realises that they are in fact buying into exactly that, a dream from within the mind of another. It is not reality, if indeed we can decide on what reality truly is anymore. It is not needed, it is just desired because of our bastardized social norm and position. We pay more for water in a fancy bottle than the worth of the bottle and the water, and all because it may have a French and classy sounding name. This water is shipped thousands of miles to get to your door, when all along there is water almost everywhere on this planet. We pay a fortune for a ready prepared plastic bag full of salad produce that meets our modern lifestyles, whilst all along we fill our gardens with plastic lights, barbecues and pretty plastic flowers. In parallel with this, people starve in the third world. What is reality? Ask a starving child and see if it is the same as your own perception, if you truly need a personal benchmark. Our reality is not true reality. It is not reality, and it is not needed. It is all self-perpetuating, a massive lie, and we are all, in our own daily lives, helped to continue the cycle. We all make dreams and sell them to others, and then we end up believing them ourselves, and before anybody realises it, we are all living in a dream world that simply does not exist. Today, control of so many billions of people is only possible because of the internet. It has captured almost everybody, and because it is now so very mobile, it keeps a hold on us. It is like escaping the body and somehow jumping into another dimension. We stare like zombies into a world that can offer us anything we want, from buying almost anything, even sex, to showing ourselves off and emulating the stars. With the internet, we can do it all, but it is a dangerous world for the mind of man. The word man is derived from the mind, and this was the concept of man himself, that he was not the sum of his parts, but as the thinking processor unit behind the eyes. He was more than his legs and arms, for when they ceased to function, the mind remained. It was the very thing that set him apart from the other living, breathing beings on our planet, or so we believed. Man realised he was alive. He realised that he existed, had joy, worry, fear. He began to set the world in order, and suddenly the planet and the universe itself existed because we conceived of it. This separated us from the rest, not just in terms of how we thought, but we even physically began to lose our connection. The anxious element of this situation gave us responsibility for ourselves, and ever since this fear emerged, man attempted to replace it with the concept of deities, an attempt to remove responsibility for our actions and indeed our thoughts. We were so thankful for this weight off our shoulders that the religious authorities grew at an alarming rate, utilising this fear against us and growing more. Even now, in the 21st century, all our sins can be taken away by the saviour gods. These sins are caused by the parts of the mind that shadow us, the other side that we mostly attempt to ignore. Yes, all of us do this. We all claim to be better than that, but it was not so long ago that whole nations were swayed into the land of shadows by a charismatic leader who drew around him mini-demons and set the world on a path of hellish destruction. Nazi Germany was created by and from the mind of man, namely Adolf Hitler. This one divided and neurotic individual gathered the knowledge on how to convince people of his outlook. All the tools Hitler and his cohorts used are exactly the same as those we know are still being used upon us today. The German people were not evil, they were human, and they were guided on a path by the shadow of another. Their evil sides were drawn out in the name of good and righteousness, and in the end, nobody knew what they were doing was itself evil, because they had forgotten themselves entirely. All judgments and responsibility had been taken away from them in the name of the state, and because humans enjoy losing this responsibility, they were a happy people. Because of this happiness, this bliss in darkness, they could simply not understand why other nations did not want to join them. There is absolutely nothing new here at all. This is a constant cyclic human pattern that has occurred for millennia and occurs every day in everybody's life. We all tip out of balance in many ways and in many subjects. Today, all manner of weird and wonderful new religions are in fact emerging. It has always been the case that new religions emerge with each new generation, but normally this has been tempered by state and the existing power religion, as well as the speed of communication and travel. Now, most of these barriers are seemingly being sidelined by the internet. In the same way that an original leader, mystic or prophet of the past would spread the word of his or her supposed enlightenment, today the individual prophets of the world have a unique outlet. They no longer have to gather forces in localized towns and villages and ask apostles to spread the word. Today they can forge ahead and spread their word via websites, articles, social media and email shots. Internet proselytizing is the new religion, and in this way there is something for everyone. Every emotional experience that is driven by every individual life and hormone is spread across the world, and so there are now millions of religions. These include alien worship in many guises, clairvoyance, spiritualism, strands of older religions, and more literal goddess and god worship of personality. There may be some truth in some of these, there may not, but evidence seems to now be subjective and unchecked, and certainly of a personal experience in nature. We trust in what we read and see. We read the experience of an individual on a website, And what reason do we have to doubt them? But do we know them? Can we really trust them? We have to remind ourselves of Adolf Hitler. We have to know who we are ourselves before we have the ability to know another. And beyond this, many of these new messiahs are in fact being paid to do what they do, to sell us a product, idea or philosophy. There is always a reason behind everything. Mankind is still ingenious and still grappling with each other to make money. We will often turn to almost anything to better our lives. The German people are not all a special race geared towards world domination, and policemen are not all dominating control freaks. All of mankind is capable of the worst atrocities, and all of mankind is capable of the greatest good. We are two in one, divided and confused. But when we come together, we can be very bad or very good. We can rise as nations or societies and manifest every man's duality on a massive scale. This is why too much power in the hands of one man is dangerous, because it is not tempered by extra minds, and so, like Stalin, Hitler, and a whole host of other dictators from the past, the many can fall under the magic of the one and be destroyed by the one. Today we have a culture of political leaders using popularism to gain power, building power and dividing people. But we the people, at least, have the numbers on the internet to balance out any dictatorial element. But the power of the few naturally emerges from the mire, and we have major corporations controlling much of what we see, even if it is all an illusion. Search engines choose via computer programs which websites get listed, and so the true freedom we expect and perceive with the internet is not actually there. Wherever man finds a marketplace, wherever he sets up a stall, then lies and deceit quickly follow, because it is within our nature, and the sooner each one of us realises that we have a shadow side, the better we will be to deal with it. The state reacts like a larger version of ourselves and will jump on lies and deceit where found or highlighted, and so more and more state control is the result. And because the state is a larger version of ourselves, it too has a shadow side, and it too lies and deceit. Why therefore would anybody hand over the responsibility, respect and life to state or religion, when they are manifestations of the divided mind of man? Don't. Now we have seen how our very nature, dreams and desires trap us and are used against us, for us and by us. Nobody can now claim to be free of all this, nor innocent of its abuse. But today there is yet another level of control upon us, and one in which we as human beings are rapidly becoming lost. It is a world of dreams in such an incredibly profound and stark fashion that we ought to be amazed that we have fallen into its gaping mouth. As the battle to beat everybody else has ensued, it has brought all manner of imaginative inventions. These are forms manifested from within the mind of man, and here is an issue because one thing is sure: the mind of man is divided and at odds with not just itself, but everybody else, and now nature too. We all constantly fight intense battles inside our minds. We argue with ourselves as if there were two of us. We argue on an hourly and daily basis, trying to reason through mundane issues, but also more emotive concerns about life and death. We worry about loved ones and have to come to terms with the fact that we think of ourselves as gods, and yet we suffer and die like mere animals. Imagination has again stepped into the breach, and we have fed ourselves yet more lies and the age-old extension of our own ego, God, as an answer to the dilemma that we may not in fact be the most important thing on the planet. All of this is a result of our divided minds, and we are deluding ourselves with all manner of answers, which never quite seem to fulfill us and close the divide. Until we fully accept what we really are, we will go on creating new realities. This has been true of mankind for millennia, and certainly true of him when he settled down into communities. The technologies of today are in fact taking us further and further away from reality and more into the dream state than ever before. Billions of children around the world are being fed unrealities by computer games. They live out their precious lives in a world that is not real, whilst mum and dad spend every waking moment battling and selling to pay for the products of the delusional world. This causes yet more division within each mind, but also within the family unit. And because all of this is an illusion, not one of them is truly fulfilled, and so the family eventually breaks down, and division in the form of divorce often occurs. The child is only being prepared for one thing: a life of exactly the same as his parents, a treadmill of buy and sell and lack of self-knowledge. Instead of learning the simple basic skills of life and love, children today are taught how to manipulate the illusionary world of computer screens, moving imaginary characters around, killing and maiming the enemy, which is normally some politically propagandized and illusionarily evil role model. Most people do not realise the incredible amounts of money made from the multi-million-dollar worlds of illusion, but they also don't realise the propaganda content is immense. In fact, there are many games strategically funded by governments and other agenda-driven authorities and organisations that are specifically written to suck in the minds of the youth into particular ways of thinking. This creates masses of later, controllable young adults for the financial war machine and good voters who are now loyal to the cause. We are all pawns in a game that has gone out of control, because it is a life spent in an illusionary world with nobody specifically controlling it. We all make assumptions about our leaders, peers, corporations, state and religion, and yet, all along, they are making assumptions about us. Nobody is in control anymore, for nobody ever was. It is simply all the world of a dream state, created over time by one thing and another, without a goal or purpose other than bastardized functions of the evolutionary mind. Now we have a world of technology that is overtaking us, and we have to somehow try to keep our heads wrapped around the lightning speed with which it moves. With mobile phones we can in fact take this world of illusion with us anywhere we go. There is no escaping this phenomenon, because the human tribal instinct to be as good or better than everybody else and to be accepted in our society forces us to participate. And so, technology, like everything else we humans create, is truly an extension of ourselves, and it is yet again a world of falseness, covering up the real mess we are in. The truth is that the technology we created with all good intention is now driving us, and we have become extensions of the machine itself. These leaps in technology are part and parcel of the human evolutionary cycle, from the flint spear to the space shuttle. We cannot stop them, but we ought to be aware of their effects upon the human mind. The lesson to learn is that just like the Frankenstein monster, it is a mirror of ourselves, and it is destroying the very essence of what we are. All of this is why even now, in the 21st century, we remain stupid humans who constantly battle with each other, because we are forcing ourselves away further and further from the truth of what we really are. We have created a world of imagination in which we can live out a dream life, and to pay for it we live in hell. Individualization is part of the problem in the West. The Western world has found itself to be a mass of individuals with little comprehension that their own interaction with each other and existence itself actually has cause and effect. In the Orient, especially India, we often find a very different reality. Here we find that dark and light are not separate entities, but actually coexistent realities, and that extends to the human too. Just as their myriad gods are not separate entities, but actually manifestations of the oneness of all things, they simply have different faces and forms, and so mankind is also a reflection of nature itself. In this way, in the East, man is part of nature, not subject to it or master of it. As a consequence, he is part of the collective soul, conscious nature, walking and talking. Much of the blame for the West's disassociation from nature can be given to our modern form of Christianity, and our version of science. To those in certain schools of esoteric thought, highly influenced by Eastern concepts, science was a method of understanding nature better for the good of the whole. It was a way simply of becoming conscious of nature. Today, we have more often than not reduced science to a means of making yet more money, and Christianity itself was reduced from its original Gnostic and therefore Eastern concepts to an empirical law-making power. Divide and conquer was the mantra, and so mankind's own mind was divided not just from another's but from the very concept of oneness with nature. This division has left behind a stark emptiness that simply cannot be filled with the materialism our modern society has replaced it with. The many faces of God, nature itself, cannot be replaced with the many faces of the Hollywood deities, no matter how hard we try. The world is at a point of crisis, and the choices we have given ourselves are not attractive. On the one hand, we can embrace the materialism and power games of the darker nature and accept that this will entail yet more misery for millions, and on the other, we have to lose that self we have become accustomed to in order to discover a more real self that is one connected to nature. The self we perceive is in reality a self dealt out to us via propaganda and mind control. It has become a massive and unwieldy machine which creeps across the world in an almost unstoppable force. It is only unstoppable because we allow it. The answer is simple. It is so simple that it cannot be understood easily by the minds of those confused with technology, materialism, and false doctrines of controlling religions and organisations. There is only one way to come to a full realisation of the truth, and that is to free the mind of all the absurdities that lie above and beyond simple survival. These were the truths passed to us from ancient times via the Gnostics and others. They found a home in India and the East. They lived for millennia in Egypt. They survived Christianity's onslaught under the cloak of alchemy, and today it is time for mankind to rediscover these truths. Only by freeing the mind can the whole realization come through that we are part of nature, not separate from it. Only by understanding science via this intuition can we truly do science. If we overcomplicate nature with our words and devices, then we lose the path. So what is this nature? Hermann Hesse, the Nobel Prize-winning writer, said, "It is wrong to think that nature is the enemy of man, something to be conquered. Rather, we should look upon nature as a mother and should peaceably surrender ourselves to it. If we take that attitude, we will simply feel that we are returning to the universe as all other things do, all animals and all plants. We are all just infinitesimal parts of the whole. It is absurd to rebel. We must deliver ourselves to the great current." And this current is key to understanding our part in the whole. We are beings of energy, empowered by energy into life from the spark of procreation, the union of opposites. Even greater psychological empowerment comes from the same pattern as the physical world, the same spark and pattern of nature mirrored in the mind. It is the Gnostic and Eastern concept of uniting dark and light, the left and right within our very minds. Not being divided, but being whole within ourselves and truly and emotionally connecting therefore to the wholeness of nature itself, because we will have achieved what nature itself drives for: balance. The fact that the dominating Western powers have promulgated a divisive concept of the persona or individuality has caused a sickness in our society and the way we see the world and our existence. We view all things as separate, and thus we report on them as such to each other and continue and expound the problem. Society, science, philosophy, and everything else becomes competitive instead of united. With the added incentive of the emotive creation of religion and belief systems, from whatever angle we have yet further problems. And yet, nature has remained the same. Our nature is still inside us, still lurking beneath these human creations awaiting discovery. But everybody has to come to this realization in their own way. For the vast majority, these truths will not reveal themselves through words, which are often masks for lies, unless those words depict a symbolic journey or quest. It is highly unlikely the truth will be found in the small screens of the mobile phone. Once we have balanced our minds with regard to our desire for gods, we will be free of the desire to emulate them, and so we can turn to higher things. The time is now to go outside and observe nature in order to understand the inner nature. You will see that nature itself, whether tree, cat or dog, does not live its life according to what happened yesterday or what may happen tomorrow, but simply lives now. Nothing that happens on social media matters to nature. If we constantly worry about what happened before, then our imagination will take over our mind and feed us a list of possible and often negative assumptions about the future. The power of understanding nature for us is no different to that seen by our ancestors. It was magical to be able to read a pack or herd, to predict the seasons, to know exactly what to say or do for a loved one at the right time. But more than that, it was ultimately fulfilling. Such connection to nature that only openness can bring releases an energy so profound there is no method of expressing it in words. This sense of unification enlightens the soul, it brightens the day, and makes the night a sound sleep. It gladdens the heart, for it reaches to the very centre of ourselves. It reconnects nature with nature, and we become conscious of it and in awe of its power. Nature holds the secret to great power, and we must wield it with love. Today, our science is coming full circle and revealing to us that we are part of the whole. For over 100 years, science has reduced all that we have observed into names and categories, and experimented with them as if we were gods. We did not try to live with our world, we tried to use it for our own ends. It was man against nature, not with it.